Hello and welcome to the Parker Files, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Hot Toys Gamora, MMS 483. This is the second version of Gamora and it's from the movie Guardians of the Galaxy 2. For the packaging, Hot Toys have done a masterful job combining the essential role music plays in the Guardians films with the uniqueness and color branding around each character. As you know, if you've watched any of my previous videos, the box art is something I value almost as much as the figures themselves. To me, it's reminiscent of getting a CD back in the day. I love flipping through the artwork and reading all the lyrics and notes the bands would make while listening to the album itself. Certain bands had better artwork than others, and it's no different with Hot Toys. And for me personally, this is hands down my favorite line of box art to date, and it would appear that this is the last release we'll get in this line. The Drax release is moving so slow, he's invisible. The color green is prominent throughout for obvious reasons, but there are some fine details and printed textures all over the box that add different shades, which give it more life, dimension, and realism. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is spray painted on the top of the box, along with some tape deck buttons. The way these buttons are designed, like the dials and speaker on the rest of the box, it gives it an added dimension to the box and it creates the illusion that they're raised, and I love how it looks. On the left side of the box, we get more tape deck realism with a band-like sticker, but it's a Guardian sticker with their name and the Milano on it. The sticker itself looks great, and the colors on the sticker contrast nicely against the other colors on the box. On the opposite side, we get a nice volume dial, which looks fantastic, and again, the attention to detail with the shading creates a nice illusion of realism. On the front of the box, we get the Marvel and Guardians film logos over top a small speaker vent, as well as some other control knobs. Toward the middle, we see the Volume 2 cassette housed in the tape deck along with Gamora's name and the release information. There's a clear plastic cover over the top of the cassette simulating the cassette deck, and to its right we get a Gamora branded pink Ravager logo. The color and placement of these details is incredible, and I love how they work together. Besides the overall aesthetic, what my eyes are drawn to instantly is Gamora's face painted onto the speaker. The way the lines from the other parts of the box run into the lines on the speaker is a nice detail, but it's the colors used on Gamora's portrait that make this speaker and box art pop. The speaker itself is textured, which is a nice touch, and that combined with the design, again, creates that raised illusion which really makes this box the tape deck it was designed to be. All of this is affirmed when you look at the back of the box, which looks just like the black rubber back of an old cassette player. The lines are simple and accurate, right down to the screws in the corners and the input-outputs on the bottom. And speaking of the bottom, I just had to point out the small raised stands on the bottom of this tape deck. Removing the top of the box reveals the circuit board for the tape deck, a closer look at the cassette itself, and of course, as always, the credits to the cast and crew who bring Gamora to our shelves. Alright, you get that I love this box art, but enough about the packaging. Let's open it up and see what's inside. Here we have Gamora out of the box, and it's an understatement to say that this release has been a long time coming. It arrives after 933 days since its announcement, but now that she's finally here, we can stop asking where is Gamora, and we can start asking who is Gamora, why is Gamora, or better yet, was Gamora worth the wait? In my opinion, she most certainly was, and not because this figure comes without its flaws, because it has them, or because it comes with a lot of accessories, even though she comes with her fair share. But I believe this Gamora was worth the wait because this release is far superior to its predecessor, and it's a must for those who are trying to complete the Guardians of the Galaxy lineup. The moment I pulled it out of the box, I instantly forgot about the 933-day wait, which is saying something for someone as impatient as me. So first reactions are high. Starting from the ground up, let's talk about the bad news, or at least some of the bad news, first. The boots are unfortunately a one-piece plastic-style piece, which of course means zero articulation, which as always makes no sense to me whatsoever, especially considering there is a noticeable ball joint in the ankle, as well as some places within the boot itself where it could have been hidden rather easily. I'm a bit shocked that Hot Toys, after 933 days, couldn't get this right. Well, now on to some good news. The boots themselves look fantastic. The buckles are sculpted and painted really well, the heels have a unique shape and tread which adds to the realism, and the top flap has a texture and a sheen to it, along with some fine silver detailing on top. All of these components have incredible detail and realism to them that help these boots stand out on an almost completely black outfit. The knee pads are sculpted and stitched really well and are a nice rubber material that reminds me of the material used in the Michael Keaton Batman figures. They go over top of the pants and leave just the slightest of gaps before the boots. The pants are made of a pleather style material, and my first thoughts are more of a concern in regards to them deteriorating over time. That said, they don't feel like the same type of pleather used on other figures, so we'll have to wait and see how they hold up over time. Concerns aside, I have to say that these pants look fantastic in hand. The stitching lines used are well done and it creates a nice silhouette to the legs, and I like how it looks. Now let's move on to the upper body where the details are subtle yet intricate. Starting off with the black pleather vest, which is removable via a zipper on the right hand side, it looks amazing. The way this is designed and put together really helps create that female silhouette that carries on throughout the body. The buttons or snaps in the vest give it that biker aesthetic which fits Gamora to a T. The undershirt appears to be more like two undershirts with a patterned one flowing out from the bottom and a plain white shirt at the top. I'm not sure if this is supposed to represent one shirt that looks different at the top or bottom, but when removing the vest you see that they are actually just two small pieces of material attached to the vest itself. The arm gauntlets, while a rubbery material, do a nice job representing leather straps. They're two different sculpts, both of which are well done, with the one in the left arm having some buttons at the wrist area, while the one in the right is just wrapped straps. The hands are a simple sculpt with some flawless paint apps. The upper wrist gauntlet on the right hand is painted in a nice subtle silver, as are the rings on her fingers, which stands out in a nice contrast against the green of her skin and the browns and blacks found on the rest of the outfit. The hands themselves are the perfect tone of green with just the right amount of texture, and the detail of her darker green fingernails are the perfect finishing touch. The belts are made of a rubbery style material, and while I have some issues with mine, which I'll point out a bit later, I have to say that they do look great. The sculpt and the buckles is good, and the silver paint app caps them off really nicely. The jacket Gamora is wearing here is a thing of beauty. It's reminiscent, of course, to the jacket Star-Lord and Yondu wear, but with a feminine touch. The buckles and straps on the upper front part are fine details that are executed really well. The jacket has a subtle wiring which really helps for dynamic posing, which we'll look at a bit later. Speaking of realism, even though this jacket isn't made with real leather, it doesn't appear fake, and I love how the use of just a few different colors of pleather, some fantastic stitch work, and well-placed cuts create a jacket as fashionable and aggressive as Gamora is. As always, when it comes to hot toys, the head sculpt is what gets the praise or causes the biggest commotion in the collecting community, and while this head sculpt, in my opinion, is far superior to the prior version, it isn't without its flaws and hasn't avoided complaints in the community. Let's start by looking at the biggest issue most people have, and that of course is the rooted hair. These are action figures, not dolls, and yet this rooted hair is very doll-like and it's a frizzy, annoying mess. I'll admit I love the coloring of it, but as you can see here, even after futzing with it more than I wanted to, it's still a bird's nest. There's stray pieces all over the place and I don't like how it looks at all. Could I take some more time and effort and maybe use some product to make it look better? Sure. Do I want to do that? No. I think for people who will just put this figure on a shelf, it'll probably be okay. But for people like me who do videos or for those who are photographers, this is a real annoyance. The other issue I have with the hair in this figure is that the hairline begins a little too high in the forehead to my liking, and the hair itself is too puffy at the top. All that said, I have to admit that sculpted hair for a figure with this length of hair would have been equally annoying and frustrating because it would limit head movement. So as much as I don't like playing with dolls, for Gamora, I'll make an exception. Looking at the sculpt itself, I have seen some posts in the community saying they don't think it's that great, and I have to say, personally, I completely disagree. I think this is a flawless portrait of Zoe Saldana. The expression is blank, but I'm okay with that because I see Gamora in this sculpt from every angle. And in my opinion, it doesn't take away from the exceptional paintwork and detail found throughout her face. And I love the attention to detail under her eyebrows, and the unique lines on her cheeks and forehead are stunning. And so, for a rating of this Gamora head sculpt, personally, I'd give this sculpt an 8.5 out of 10. In terms of accessories, Gamora comes with a number of different items, and while I think they are all impressive and well executed, they aren't all items that are functional or usable for me in my display. For starters, here we have Gamora in a subtle museum pose with what is my favorite accessory, her sword. There's a collapsed version of this sword, which we'll look at a bit later, but this is the look I want on my shelf because it's what I see in my mind when I think of Gamora. I think this is a reuse of the sword that came with the previous version of Gamora, but I'm okay with that because of how good this looks. The sculpt is perfect, the handle is smooth, which contrasts so well with the lines and details in the blade itself. The ends are sharp, which adds to the realism, and the silver paint app is exquisite combined with the fine details in the indentations. I love how this sword looks and how she looks holding it. There are two other things to note in this pose. The first is the hand variation on the left hand, which is holding the sword. There are two versions of this hand, and we'll see the other in just a moment, but as with all the hands, the sculpt and paint app are well done and consistent. The second thing I wanted to mention here is the slight articulation in the jacket. The fine wire adds just enough support to allow for some additional realism, even to a museum pose. Here we have Gamora in a fully articulated dynamic pose, and I love how this looks, until I take a closer look. The faults in this figure show up in the details of this type of posing. Taking a closer look, let's talk about some of the articulation, or lack of articulation, shown here. Because Hot Toys failed to go with a split-cut boot design, the inability to move the ankles is really limiting the pose and the realism it should have. I'm shocked that I can get this figure to stand on its own in this pose, but at the same time, it isn't as lifelike in the legs as I would have hoped for, which also affects the pose in the upper body in order to maintain its balance. The knee bend in the left leg is more subtle, but the articulation in the right leg is utilizing more of its range, and the outfit can accommodate that easily. You see the material creases at the bend in a natural looking way, and it does return to form as it should. Taking a look at the upper body in this pose, as I said, it's not as natural as I would like it to look due to the limitations in the lower body. That said, the articulation is better here, and for a few reasons worth noting. The first is the improvements made to this version over the last version. Hot Toys did away with the seamless arms from the first release and gave us a double joint at the elbow, which is a welcome change. This engineering choice, combined with a sturdier pleather jacket, puts my mind a bit more at ease when leaving her posed dynamically for longer periods of time. The neck is a fixed neck, but it's made with a rubbery material which allows it to move easily. I can't think of another figure in my collection that has this, but I'm glad Gamora does because it certainly helps with posing. As mentioned earlier, the wire in this jacket isn't heavy, but it's just enough to hold the jacket in place, and I really appreciate that detail because it makes a big difference to the overall look when posing her like this. Lastly, this is where I let go of my issue with the rooted hair. Gamora and other figures like her, like the Scarlet Witch for example, they would be so restricted from poses like this if they had sculpted hair. It comes down to that question of realism versus posability, and I guess it's true what they say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. What you can get, at least with this release, is a completely different look due to some of the accessories provided. While Baby Groot is off dancing to Mr. Blue Sky, Gamora is still here and still in a museum pose, but wearing her long sleeve shirt and flight vest representing how she looked in that scene at the beginning of the film where the Guardians were battling a giant creature on the planet Sovereign. There are obviously new accessories to focus in on here, but before I get to those, I do want to point out a few things that have already been seen, but not mentioned so far. The first is the collapsed version of her sword. Here it is in its sheath, and like the full version of the sword, the detail on display here is impressive. For such a small accessory, the sculpt and paint detail are stunning, and while I do intend to pose her with the full blade, this is a nice secondary option. The other thing I wanted to point out here before moving on to the other accessories is an issue I have with my personal figure. I can't say that this will be an issue for every figure, but it is on mine and it's beyond irritating. The strap from her sheath that goes over the thigh doesn't attach at the buckle as it may appear. It actually attaches underneath the sheath itself. There's a small flap that both ends of the buckle slot into. When I took Gamora out of the box for the first time, one of the ends popped out. To get that back in was an annoying bout of trial and error due to my large hands and the way the two ends attach. And even after getting it attached, it continually popped out during the different poses I put the figure in. The frustration of doing this over and over again was one thing, but the bigger concern is the wear and tear on the leg material over time. You can already begin to see a bit of scuffing on the pleather just above the buckle on the back of her leg, and the fear of damage is going to limit the poses I put her in and how often I change them. Another accessory that was equally challenging to work with was this wine color shirt she comes with. The process of removing the other outfit isn't super difficult, but the zipper on the inner vest doesn't instill confidence when undoing it. I was holding my breath the entire time, hoping it wouldn't break, and after getting it off, I kept telling myself, these are action figures, not dolls. These are action figures, not dolls. But then, I put this shirt on, reattached the head sculpt, and began brushing her hair out. The shirt is well tailored and nicely detailed. The pattern and 2 tones of color capture the look from the film perfectly, and the nice thing about this shirt is that it allows you the opportunity to take advantage of the jointed arms, as you can accommodate a wider range of articulation than you can with the long jacket. The other notable accessory shown here is the jetpack. While this is a fully plastic piece, it looks anything but. The sculpt is flawless with intricate lines and details throughout, and the paint app is exceptional. The primary metallic finish gives off a nice sheen in the light, and I love the fine details of gold in the middle chest plate and the small red tip at the bottom. Altogether, this is a beautiful piece, and while it isn't an accessory I intend to use after this video, I do have to say that I love how it looks. The Guardians of the Galaxy are known for their unique weapons, and while Rocket is mostly known for his wide array of guns, Gamora isn't to be outdone. Here she is with my second favorite accessory she comes with, her blaster. As mentioned earlier, due to the jointed arms with this release, I love that you can pose her like this with no concerns of long-term damage. No matter how awesome the weapon, I would never do a pose like this with seamless arms, so I'm really glad Hot Toys made that change. The other thing to quickly point out here is the right hand used for holding the gun itself. The paint app is consistent with the others, and while the sculpt is great, the caution here is to use patience when positioning this gun in her hand. The position the fingers are in give just enough room to get the handle in there, but if you aren't careful, you could break the trigger finger off. But once you get it in her hand, this blaster is a phenomenal accessory. I love everything about it. The sculpt is perfect and the paint app is incredible. The tones of gold and silver used are on point, and I love the weathering detail on this weapon. The pitting and stains are the sort of fine details that bring realism from the larger-than-life silver screen to our shelves in 1/6 scale. Originally, I thought I'd be using the condensed sword as my secondary weapon, and I will, but only in its sheath, so now I can show off this blaster at the same time. Last but not least, here we have the one and only Baby Groot. All of the figures in the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 line have come with a Baby Groot, but all of them are different sculpts in various poses. One sits on Star-Lord's shoulder, while another is in a cage with extended arms, and so on. But here we have Groot and the bomb he took into the center of Ego, and I love how this looks. The sculpt, again, for such a small accessory, is quite impressive. The detail in Groot himself is awesome, and I love the detail in the paintwork, how it captures his facial expression and shows separation and detail in his body, right down to the green tint at the top of his head. The bomb itself is even more intricate than Groot, and the fine details of the wires, the red buttons, and other components bring Baby Groot to life. And while I do love this scene in the movie and this representation of it, this isn't an accessory that will make it onto my shelf. Where is Gamora? Well, after 933 days, she's on my shelf. But the bigger question is, was Gamora worth the wait? As I pointed out, the strap issue, rooted hair, and lack of ankle articulation are some significant flaws that take away from my overall score on this release. A number of the accessories are lacking, not in execution, but in usefulness, and beyond what we did get, I would have loved to get the blade Thanos gave Gamora, which we saw in Infinity War. But I realize that this is a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 release, and while it's still disappointing that it doesn't look like we'll ever get that second version of Drax to complete this line, I can't hold that against this release either. And so overall, I do feel like the flaws of this release are overshadowed by the quality of the outfit on this figure, the change to the arms, and the stunning head sculpt. All of these positives are why I believe this version of Gamora is superior to the previous release and a worthwhile upgrade. Mantis pointed out that Star-Lord had feelings of love for Gamora, and while my feelings aren't of the romantic kind, I do have to say, I love this figure, and for me, she was well worth the wait. And so, all in all, after looking at Gamora and everything she comes with, I'd rate this figure an 8.5 out of 10. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you want to stay tuned for more. If so, take a second and hit that subscribe button. There'll be more 6-scale figures and diorama reviews coming your way. But until then, stay safe and collect because you can.